Hello, magnificences. Welcome inside what would you call it? The reception area of Practice University. Thank you very much for clicking on my silly little video to find out more about the 21 habit practices of self-mastery. I will be sending you the practice guides for the first two practices, which you get for free, relaxing the contraction and the wounded child lullaby. But before I do that, I think it's important for me to tell you the rest of my journey that's brought me to this place of cultivating naturally the wise guru, as opposed to having it gifted to me through surrender. So what happened was, after I left the park, I was there for 7 months, and by the time I left, I'd already established a career as the poet called Paradox. I was already making a living selling CDs of my poetry at open mic gigs, and also putting on cabaret shows. The first one I put on was called Gods and Goddesses, and because I was living in what you would consider really big, nice, communal, artistic squats, some of them legally, where the landlord preferred to have us in there than drug addicts and what have you. I was just living the life of Riley, basically. No rent. We all did everything communally with food and stuff like that. And so I had enough money to basically live a great life in London for between 2000, at the end of 2002 and 2006, when I went to India. And whole story of India, 7 months in India, then came back, then to London for 3 months, then went to California, whole story there, which I'll tell you at some point, and then went to Mexico to a rainbow gathering. So I don't know if you know about rainbow gatherings, but they're these things that have been going since the 60s, I believe, and it's just where a whole bunch of hippies, up to 10, 20,000, are given some land by a farmer, landowner, and they basically live on the land off-grid for a length of time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And you basically have to get your water from the river and build fires and build kitchens, and you're literally living off grid. Amazing experience. And I'd heard about it, and I went to join one, had an amazing time there. While I was there, there was a guy called Kareem who had been bringing a team of horses up through South America for the previous 10 years. And what he would do is he would stop off at various rainbow gatherings at various countries and recruit a sort of horse caravan circus, which would ride around that country on horseback, stopping at small towns and villages and offering to put on circus shows and doing magic hats, so collecting money at the end, and that money would be used to allow the caravan to continue. And I joined the one in Mexico, in Veracruz, and for 7 months rode around the countryside doing exactly that with 30 other people, 15 guys, 15 girls roughly. Adventure of a lifetime, absolutely sensational, loads of stories about that. But then I jumped off a cliff into a river, hit a rock, smash up my leg there, got gangrene, nearly died. 3 beautiful angels, Megan, Pachan and Sula, took me to the hospital, stopped the doctors from amputating there and then, found a treatment to kill the gangrene called hyperbaric oxygen therapy, and sent an email out to my friends and fans in the UK, who raised £8,000 to pay all my hospital treatment because I didn't have holiday insurance because I'm a dick. And actually, I'm not a dick. I don't believe in insurance, but that's another story. Well, I am a dick, but not for that reason. Actually, I need to rewind a bit before I tell you more about the leg thing. And a very important point to make is that a few months after I'd left the park and I was living in a squat called the 491 Gallery, I started to realise that I'd lost that consistent piece. My monkey mind was back, basically, and I was now triggerable. I now had bad moods again. I was back to being a normal person. And that was because I know now in hindsight that, strangely enough, once I started performing poetry at open mics and then becoming well known and becoming popular, and I had an identity again. The thing about the surrender when I first went to live in the park, part of it was becoming a nobody. part of it was taking off my roles and identities and masks and costumes that we all wear. Managing director, husband, son, father, mate, lover, all the roles and identities that we play. When I went into the park, I didn't have any friends. My mum had disowned me, or my wife had left me. I had no money, I was a nobody. I was a bum. And because of that, when I woke up that morning, I literally was nobody and nothing. And that actually made room, that level of surrender of all of my attachments and identifications. You'll hear me talk a lot about that. That surrender of all my attachments and identifications created space for the wise guru, one's true self, to emerge and be looking out of my eyes and be perceiving the world and speaking out of my voice, etc., etc. And when I then became a successful poet, all of a sudden I had a new mask, I had a new costume, I had a new role, I had a new persona. Oh, I'm Paradox the poet that everybody loves. And I don't tend to use this word because it has too many associations which are too confusing. But yes, my ego got back in the back door, and as did my mental patient, basically. And so now I had the experience that when I was being an innocent poet and being inspired and creating and playing with my friends and creating shows and doing all sorts of fun, childlike, spontaneous, fresh, alive stuff, wise guru, no problem. But when I wasn't doing that, when I was just being a normal person living a normal life, I was being a normal person living a normal life. In other words, my mental patient was driving the bus. So this happened throughout that period of between 2004 and 2006. And I noticed that it happened quite quickly, because when you lose a constant state of peace and joy and love and never getting bothered by anything, you notice when you lose it. So what happened is that I basically went on a hardcore spiritual seeking mission to get it back. And when I say hardcore, I mean hardcore. I'm a person of extremes. So I did the following: 6 10-day silent meditation retreats for Passioners, 4 4-day vision quests off into the woods, no speaking, no eating, just drinking water, no phone, no books, just you and yourself, vision quest style. 2 40-day water only fasts. Yes, water only for 40 days, twice. I never thought I'd do 2. Again, loads of stories that I'll tell you at some point if you join Practice University. But you can see what I mean when I say hardcore. Trying to attempt to get that state back, get the wise guru online, sedate my mental patient, chill out my mind, inner peace, all of it. And what I will say is that these extreme versions did give me a number of peak experiences, a number of mystical experiences, a number of returns to that state, but they were all temporary. There's a saying, after the ecstasy, the laundry, and it's very true. Yes, your peak state can get you there, but you will crash, and you'll crash hard, and it will lead to depression and sadness. So you'll be worse off than you were when you were seeking it. And so when I went to India, going to India was one of my other techniques. And again, I obviously had a lot of spiritual experiences in India, all temporary, same back in London, same back in California, same back in Mexico. Although Mexico was the best thing I did, because the horse caravan and the rainbow, because you're living on the land, you have to get your hands dirty, and you're in nature and you're doing practical things. And there's that wonderful saying, the devil makes work for idle hands. And I understand that now. It's because when you're just in your head and you've got all the mod cons of life, you have time for the monkey mind and the wounded child to just fucking drive you crazy, and just create so many problems that don't exist. There's that wonderful Mark Twain quote, isn't there? All these problems I never had, or something. Anyway, I'll look it up. But yeah, when I went to join the Rainbow and then the horse caravan, we had things to do. We had to dig shit pits. We had to chop wood. We had to make food for 500 people. We had to do stuff. And when we had the horses to deal with. And we had to be cowboys. We had to get the horses together. We had to saddle them. We had to clean the, we had to do stuff. And just that alone was the most healing thing I did, because I didn't have time to sit around disappearing up my arsehole, navel gazing, fucking thinking about everything. So the Mexico was great, and then I jumped off the cliff, and etc., etc. So it brings us back to the point. So what happened when I went through this life or death adventure was that the minute they dragged me out the river and I lay there with my leg in the air, what had happened is a rock had punched a hole in my heel, which had smashed the bones and literally punched a massive hole in the bottom of my heel. And I didn't know at the time, but it gave me gangrene as well, or I caught gangrene. As I was lying on the sort of little shore there, the beach, I remember it vividly. The normal mental patient me began exactly what you would imagine. All of the terrified, horrific interpretations of the event. Oh my God, what's happened? What have I done? Oh my God, am I crippled? What's going to happen to me? All of what you'd imagine. And it began them for about a second and a half. And then it was like something pressed the mute button. And it just muted all of my fear, worry, anxiety, embarrassment, shame. And it was replaced by this mighty presence that I think of as the cosmic joker, because as I was lying there with literally a fountain of blood pouring out of my heel, and all my friends were running around panicking, not all of them, but they were running around panicking, shocked, some fainted, I started cracking jokes. Now, look, I'm a funny guy, and I've made a career out of being a funny guy, so I know I'm a funny guy. But I can promise you, I've never been funnier than when I lay on that beach and the wise guru stroke cosmic joker took over. And what I can describe it as is that this is how I see the divine. The divine didn't give a shit about me. All of my narrow little self-centered ego fears and, oh my God, what's happening? Me. Didn't give a shit. Just press the mute button on it all. And at the same time as not giving a shit about all my little separate self stuff, loved me unconditionally. Didn't give a shit about all my stuff, yet loved me unconditionally. Didn't give a shit, loved me unconditionally. That's the ultimate paradox. And I felt completely held, completely safe. The whole thing was hilarious. There was no interpretation that this was a bad thing. It was just an event, and it was an adventure. And that energy that I had from the moment I smashed my leg lasted through the 11 days of this life and death adventure of getting rid of the gangrene, of raising the money. Megan, Pachan and Sula, love you. Got me back to England, all my amazing friends that raised all that money, seeing them at Buddhafield. It's lasted until now. I have literally never been through the 5 stages of grief. What was it? Denial, anger, bargaining. I know acceptance, I forget one, but basically I've never been through that process because of the wise guru, who just took over and didn't allow my mental patient to worry or fear or regret. And it lasted, as I said, from the time I got out of the river with the smashed leg, right through the whole Mexico experience, right through the amputation, right through learning to walk again, right through finding somewhere to live. And I kind of lost it. It happened in May. Yeah, I pretty much lost it around Christmas the following year, Christmas, January. So about 7 months, same as the park pretty much. And then, what was it this time? Whereas I guess it was a similar thing. So I created a workshop called The Art of Meaning. after everything that happened to me, because again, I had all this joy and I had all this wise guru going on. So I had all this creativity and I had this desire to share and empower people and inspire people. So I created this workshop and I started doing this workshop and people loved it. And once again, I had another identity. So I had this surrender. When I smashed my leg, I had to surrender. I was totally helpless. I relied on Megan, Pachan and Sula. I relied on all the people to give me that money. I relied on the network of connections and friends that I'd built up based on all of my performing up until that point and the talks and the inspiration and joy I'd given people. It was returned to me. And so, you know, I had to rely on that, on the community. And so that surrender totally broke my heart open. That's what I remember. I remember breaking down in tears because I couldn't believe there was that much love out in the world from people for me. I couldn't believe it. And it broke my heart open, and that helped with this new Wise Guru intervention. And then, as I say, after about 7-8 months, after I started doing workshops again, once again, my ego got in the back door. Once again, I lost that permanent state of inner peace and joy and went back to being only having it when I was doing my creative work, when I was giving my gift, when I was doing my poetry, which isn't bad. You know, to be honest, it's way better than the previous advertising life. At least I had, you know, chunks of Wise Guru in my life, but it's not as good as a permanent state. So to bring us up to date, so the next, this was all in 2009, 10 years. So for the next 10 years, I went through a whole series of trying to get it back. I did another 40-day fast. Obviously, I didn't do Vipassana. Oh yeah, I did some more Vipassanas. I studied, you know what spiritual seekers do. I sought to get it back, and then I got frustrated and I said, oh, I don't want to be enlightened. I don't care about it anymore. And I still coached and I still did my stuff. I still did my poetry. And I kind of just accepted that would be good enough. That was the best it was going to get. And then I had another crash and burn, the mental patient. I was living in Devon and a relationship fell apart, couldn't get a job, had to return with my tail between my legs to face the full "I told you so" judgment of my mum. And that forced me into a place of just, again, kind of helplessness. I had to go and live with my mum while I got a job and got a place to live. And again, it was the same sort of thing, surrender. And I surrendered to just getting the job that felt right. I surrendered to not being able to make a living doing my poetry and coaching anymore because it had all fallen apart. My business had crashed as well. And I got a job as a support worker for autistic teenage boys. Yes, so in this job as a support worker for autistic teenage boys, what I noticed was very quickly that autistic teenage boys are like horses. What I discovered when I learned to ride on the caravan, cowboy style, was that it's very difficult to control a horse if your inner state isn't controlled, if your monkey mind is going crazy, if your emotions are going crazy because you're upset about something. The horse will telepathically somehow pick up on that and be very difficult to control. So I learned that in order to ride well and have a good relationship with Tatanka, my horse, I needed to learn to control the inner realm. And when I started taking my boys out to the cinema or for events or looking after them in the house, I noticed the same thing. If my monkey mind was going crazy, if my emotions were chaotic, they would pick up, they would get upset, they would be very difficult. So I really had a really hardcore reason to get my shit together. And so what I did was I kind of looked back at the previous 16 years of all my practices, all my times when I was calm and peaceful, and all of the little practices that I used to help me. And I kind of reverse engineered the time in the park and the time after losing my leg to say, okay, what were the habits that I had? What were the habits of behavior that were operative during these times when I had a quiet mind, when my monkey mind was chill, when my pain body was chill? What were the habits? And I started to develop practices that practice those habits. And they had to work. I had to practice them in the field like a scientist. They had to work. They had to, bring the results I wanted. It wasn't a theory thing. It was a real world thing, because autistic teenage boys are real world beings. And what I noticed is that these practices, they did work. I had to refine them and test them and change them, but ultimately they did work. And I became a very good support worker that was very supportive and allowed my boys to blossom. And the side benefit of doing these practices daily, every day, was that the wise guru came back. Not through surrender this time, but through cultivation. And the key to it all was practice. Practice makes perfect. If you think about it, anyone who does anything amazing, whether it be a magician, a world-class athlete, gymnast, special forces soldier, surgeon, Formula One driver, amazing performer, singer, dancer, anyone who does anything to a high level, their secret is the same. Practice, rehearsal, practice, training, practice, rehearsal, training. That's what it is. That's all it is. Because repeating the same behaviors over and over again rewrites your neurology, gives you muscle memory, makes it become part of you. And actually, the wise guru, self-mastery, whatever you want to call it, it's a habit. Self-mastery is a habit. The wise guru is a habit. It's a habit of being, a habit of behavior, a habit of perception, a habit of thinking, a habit of speaking, habit of action. And by doing it in this job as a support worker, I accidentally discovered that doing these practices every day brought back the wise guru, but not in a peak experience way that crashed, in a maintainable way that grew over time and became more and more grounded and more established. And that's what inspired me to start Practice University, because anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. It doesn't take theory, it doesn't take high intelligence, it doesn't take spiritual understanding, it doesn't take money or a lot of money. It doesn't take anything really, it just takes daily practice. So hence Practice University, hence these first two practices, which I hope you take and learn every day. And I'll send you a link to the main site where you can find out about the other 19 practices and why they can help accelerate and amplify your experience, so you reach a grounded everyday state of what I call living happily ever after, right now, all day, every day, and twice on Sundays. And thank you very much for listening, spending time with me. Hope to see you on the other side within Practice University.